Hey everyone, thank you all for joining us here today. Let's wait a few minutes and have everyone join. Um, we'll start in a couple minutes, but right now, while everyone's joining, we would love for you all to click that little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit your questions that we'll be answering closer to the end of this webinar. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Caitlin Rogers, and I am on the care team at Bulb Digital Portfolios. And I'm super excited to be here with you all today and to share what recruiters, we have 3 recruiters today from all different industries and all different backgrounds. And so let me share my screen with you. One moment. Okay. So again, thank you for joining us, what recruiters are looking for and how to stand out in the 2021 job market. So today we do have 3 recruiters with us. They have worked with applicants from the store level, management level, tech and beyond, and they are going to share their extensive knowledge with us today. And again, thank you all for being here. Panelists, thank you for joining us. And we're all gonna leave this webinar with a better understanding of what recruiters are really looking for in the 2021 job market. So let's start by introducing our panelists, starting with Melissa. And Melissa, could you please just state your name, the organization you work for, and how you got into your recruitment journey?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate you all for inviting me to be on the panel. My name is Melissa Wade. I am with Torchy's Tacos. I'm currently the senior manager or senior talent acquisition manager for Torchy's. And we focus a lot on hiring for our headquarter roles, our restaurant management positions, and provide support for our hourly staffing efforts. And also recruitment marketing, and we also have an internship program that we host as well.
Awesome, thank you. Brian?
Well, first of all, I just want to say my avatar is better looking than myself, has better hair, so I like it. Thank you for doing that. Brian Riley, I own my own search firm, RG Search. We have been in business since 2002. We deal with mostly emerging and high growth companies, usually from 3 million to 50 million in revenue. Yes, we do individual contributors, but we also do managers and directors and VPs and even C-level folks. And so we work with a lot of tech companies here in Austin in sales, marketing, product. We do a lot of agency work with marketing agencies as well as pharma companies, even construction companies. So yeah, it's been a great ride. It's a great place to be, certainly in Austin, Texas, but certainly elsewhere.
Great, thank you. And Daniel?
Yes, I also am a fan of the avatar, so thank you for that. Daniel Grant, I'm a global staffing manager for Google Search. And I've been with Google for about 6 years and have been in recruiting my whole career, was in the nonprofit industry before that and higher education recruiting before that. Me and my group primarily focus on hiring for all job ladders and all levels, primarily focusing on software engineers, product managers, program managers, designers, kind of the whole gamut, from entry level up to senior roles, and globally. We have a big presence in Mountain View, a couple folks in Austin, and New York, kind of all over the place. So excited to be here.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here. We're super excited. So we're going to start by rewinding to 2020 for a second. We all know 2020 was a super challenging year for everyone, especially for job seekers. Unemployment rates skyrocketed and job security plummeted. So with that being said, how have you all seen the job market shift over the past year in your own specific world?
Yeah, so I think we saw certainly certain industries be hit more than others. I think anything in kind of leisure, hospitality, recreation, arts, retail, travel, hotels. I mean, any sort of thing where people are leisurely or even restaurants were certainly hit. And so I think it really depended upon which industry that you were in. I also think it depended upon which state you lived in, because some states were more open than others. And so yeah, I think absolutely 2020 had a big impact on particular industries. The industries that we deal with at RG Search, however, while we saw that first 6 weeks of real uncertainty starting in May 2020, we were back to where we were. And there's still this war for talent within organizations. Companies are looking for A-player talent that can help drive initiatives within their organizations and add value into their organizations. And so I can tell you that from a company perspective, they have to make decisions quicker because the war for talent is extreme right now, especially in Austin, but elsewhere in the country. So what I see now is companies having to make decisions faster and can't really go through their very elongated process because the good talent is going to be taken pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I would build on that, Brian, and just agree wholeheartedly. I think the biggest thing that I've observed in our tech space is the flexibility of location. And that's evolved a lot even over the last 14, 15 months. And, as companies are coming back, not just with how do we re-enter, are we in person or not, but you're starting to see a lot of companies take very different stances on the location of where people can be. Can you work remote or not? And I do think that's giving some companies an advantage for talent. And so I think the job market, I'm watching it shift both in the competitiveness of how candidates will have a lot of opportunities on the table, but also your ability sometimes to negotiate kind of the flexibility and the benefits that certain companies bring to the table, one of which is allowing some folks to work remote, which I think is a benefit for some folks.
All right. And do you think the changes from the past year in regards to how the interview process works, say we've been doing a lot of video interviews now, do you think that this is here to stay?
I can jump in on this. This was our biggest hiccup. Right when COVID hit, we're hiring a few hundred people a week, and interviewing we have entire teams dedicated to interviewing. Yeah. And our general interview process is that we would fly a lot of candidates out to California or New York or to Austin, wherever, to interview in person. And so shifting all of that to virtual was pretty painful at first. So I think this was our biggest pain point. But now that we've moved to this model of moving all these interviews virtually, I think that Google is seeing a lot of the benefits of it. And I know our candidates are seeing a lot of the benefits of it. And so to answer this question, I do think a lot of this will stay because it creates a lot of efficiency, and we're able to really learn about candidates virtually in a way that I think we didn't think that we could. And so you are able to really capture a lot of what you captured in person in interviews. You are able to do that online. There were definitely some hiccups. But I do think there's opportunity to create more of a hybrid model. I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, where if you're not in person for interviews, how can you stand out? And I think that's what's evolved a bit, portfolios, things like that. And I think that will also stay. How do you kind of how do you give yourself an advantage, whether the interview is in person or virtually?
Yeah, absolutely. And Melissa, from the restaurant industry, how do you see these video interviews working for you, and do you think that it's here to stay for your industry?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Daniel. You know, we definitely had to make a quick shift. For our headquarter roles, we didn't experience too much of a gap, although we also traditionally would fly candidates in. We actually found a lot of value in being able to interview candidates virtually because it sped up the interview process. And so as an employer, we felt that we were able to be more competitive as we were able to move people along more quickly in the process. For the restaurants, it was a little bit more tricky. You know, as you can imagine, during COVID, we weren't interviewing as many candidates for the restaurants specifically. And so I do think that as we've continued to, we've really begun to transition out of the pandemic state. We will probably stick to doing some more in-person interviews for the restaurant specifically, just because there's a lot of value to being able to see the restaurant that you might be working in, see how a kitchen runs and some of the specifics. But from a headquarter perspective, I definitely think that we'll continue to include some of the virtual aspect to it.
Great. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's here to stay. This is something that does make it more efficient. There's the norm usually was the first interview was normally a phone call. That was how the phone screens, that sort of thing. And so in that way, you can only really get the tone and how a person communicates and kind of the content of what they're saying. But now via video, you actually kind of see how you say it. A person communicates, you can understand how a person communicates so much better via video. And so I think it's here to stay from an efficient standpoint, but I also do agree that there is value in having face-to-face. And so any sort of hybrid model, if possible, absolutely, it's beneficial for not only the candidate to understand the culture of the company when they visit, but also the company and just seeing how a person relates to people. So I think, yes, absolutely, it's here to stay. It's going to make it more efficient. However, I do believe that the face-to-face is going to continue to be a part of the interview process.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So it looks like you all have enjoyed the changes, but do you think that it has made it harder than ever to evaluate a qualified candidate versus a less qualified candidate?
I'll jump in on this one. So there's always a value to really being able to be face-to-face, right? In any kind of human interaction. Fortunately, the video calls have allowed for some of that, to really see that nonverbal interaction. And so, as Brian was saying, there's still a lot that can be read and in terms of what culture we're trying to portray from a video interview, but it definitely does not allow for us to be able to show the culture of our office space, right? But I will say that it has expanded the candidate pool as well, especially for our headquarter positions, because now we have the ability to have remote positions and have remote interviewing, which allows us to really expand the candidate pool to other areas that we may not have considered otherwise if we were focused on hiring within the Austin area specifically. And so I will say from a headquarter hiring perspective, it hasn't made it too much more challenging to be able to evaluate the quality of our candidates. And from a restaurant perspective, I think there still is value in seeing and meeting candidates in person. It is a little bit more challenging to evaluate candidates there. But I will say, again, from a headquarter perspective, because of the technology and some of those personal interactions that we're able to have, you almost get to see a candidate in even more of a comfort zone than maybe they would feel going into an office in person. That can be intimidating in its own way. So sometimes candidates will be a little bit more real if they're in their home and they're in the comfort of in their home and be able to share some time with you there.
Yeah, I completely agree. How about you, Daniel?
Yeah, I think it levels the playing field a bit. I think, Melissa, to your point, I distinctly remember my last round of interviews, and I was much more intimidated, honestly, when I had to go on site. I think there are some downsides though, and Brian hit on it. Like one of the things we really struggle with candidates is when candidates would come on site and interview, they would have a lunch with someone. They get to see the campus. They get to meet someone who wasn't interviewing them, because candidates are being courted in the same way. And that's my biggest thing. Candidates are evaluating us in every single interaction. And I think that has made it harder, I think, for candidates as well to consistently evaluate. And so that's the biggest thing I would say is think through how you want, if you're not going to be on campus, if you're not going to be at the office and able to do some of that in person, think through what are specific questions you'd want to ask each person who interviews you. What are the things that are important to you so that you can, kind of be really intentional in how you're evaluating, even if it is virtual.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So moving on from 2020, I know we all want to move on from that crazy year. So 2021 job market, let's talk about getting into the nuts and bolts of resumes specifically and how you evaluate them in the current job market. So what are some of the elements that you look for in a candidate's resume, and what helps you decide whether or not they'll make it to the next stage or next round?
I'll take this one. First of all, you should know that recruiters don't have a lot of time looking at resumes. And so first things first, make it readable. Make it to where it's easy to find the information that we're looking for. And so, and that's with layout and not putting in a lot of filler. Just making sure that you're using action words instead of maybe, for instance, maybe driving initiative, a certain initiative versus responsible for, right? And so that's going to tell me a little bit more about a person if there's action words. That's what I like to see. I like to see quantitative type of results oftentimes. If this position is a problem-solving position, then I'd like to see how you've solved problems over the years, right? Or have solved a problem in the university setting. If resourcefulness is a competency that's needed within that job, then somehow, some way on your resume, put a instance or a story around how you are resourceful. There was an obstacle that you had to get around. If you're a lifelong learner and lifelong learning is an important competency for that position, then how have you learned throughout your lifetime? Are there certain podcasts that you listen to? That anything that's going to give the recruiter an understanding of whether you have these competencies or not. Basically, a recruiter is really trying to find out, are they as good as they say they are, right? We're trying to evaluate the prospect. And so any way that you can bring that out into a resume setting that allows us to understand how good you are and what competencies that you have are going to be very valuable to the recruiter.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Melissa, is there a specific element that you look for in a resume?
I would agree with Brian, just really making it clean and easy to get to some of those key points. I would also say that keywords are important when I'm looking at a resume. So if there's keywords that really align with the job description, that we are specifically looking to hire for. That tells me that one, the candidate truly has some of those skills that we are searching for, and that they've also put in some thoughtfulness into their application specific to the job. They're not just, shooting a resume to several different employers. And I understand there's definitely a level of ease in trying to apply to multiple positions using a resume you might upload to Indeed. And that's okay too. But the more that you can customize it to a specific role, it tells me, one, you're really interested in our company specifically and in our position. And also you truly do have some of those skills that we're looking for, and you're setting an example of how to do it. I'll also say just a little bit of clarity, especially, now in COVID, post-COVID, unfortunately, there were a lot of people that were laid off and are looking for employment. And I'm definitely not going to look at a gap during these times the same as I may have before, understanding that the workforce shifted dramatically and a lot of people were left unemployed, right? And so if you can give an explanation as to why there might be a gap in your resume, that's always really helpful too. And it'll help us really understand what happened and why that gap is there. And it won't raise as much concern to a recruiter.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that you all kind of touched on this about the best way to stand out on your resume with keywords and actions and the podcast standpoint. And what gets you excited about a candidate, Daniel?
Yeah, I'll reiterate a little bit of what Mel and Brian said, but what gets me really excited is, first of all, less is more. I do think like that is always my mindset. But what gets me really excited is someone who can articulate very clear and measurable results and impact. There's a lot of words to describe the work that I've done and the jobs that I've had. You have to put a lot of words in there, but if you can make what you've done measurable and you can show results and you can show impact, that catches my eye immediately. That's huge. I would say too, like, don't shy away from unique identifiers. So if you're going after an engineering role and you have a psychology background or a math degree, those are things I highlight because, again, it's something that sets you apart. And then just to reiterate what Mel said, I think the most important thing I get excited about is when someone is very clear that they want this company and they want this job, even if I'm applying to 3 or 4 jobs. And so heavily tailoring my experience to what that job needs, because that to me is one of the biggest ways to really get somebody to stand out.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't know, Melissa or Brian, if you want to add anything that gets you excited about a candidate. I know you touched on that a little bit already.
It's exactly what Daniel said. Everything seemingly is measured nowadays, right? And so if there's a way to measure it, you need to be able to share with others those results. And so that is what attracts recruiters, is results, not, again, what specifically you did, what you were responsible for, but specific things. I can go into that a little bit later. I think there's a question in that. If you're just starting out and haven't measured anything or haven't no results, then show in your resume how you've taken initiative. That's a big part of any sort of person who's maybe in high school right now or in college and hasn't had a job, is how have you shown initiative, and has there been any recognition that you have obtained from others, an award or some sort of leadership position that would stand out to recruiters when you're starting out?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic tip for all of us here. And what is the most common mistake that you see on someone's resume or during their interview process, and how can they fix that?
Definitely, I unfortunately still do see a lot of grammatical errors, and those are some of the details, right? I still, even to this day, sometimes see names that are misspelled. And so they might be correct on the online application, but then on the resume they're incorrect, or vice versa. And that's always tough to see. And sometimes, you know, I definitely try to make an effort to continue to look past that. And if it is a really strong candidate, then, you know, I may make a recommendation to, I'll make a recommendation to adjust that before we move them in the process if that happens. Sometimes we see missing contact information. So it's really important to still include a phone number and an email address at the top of your resume. Obviously, applicant tracking systems make it a lot more feasible to not make that mistake, but especially on your resume, I think it's definitely important to be sure to be really clear on how do we get a hold of you. I will also say that there's also a lot of resumes where I see where a candidate will literally copy and paste kind of the job description bullets from previous roles. And, you know, that'll make the resume pretty lengthy. And it'll also not make it very specific to what we're looking for, right? And so when you can show that you've really put some thoughtfulness into each specific role and what your accomplishments were there, that's going to be really key, because I have seen resumes where some of the same exact points are made for each role. And so even if your roles were similar, if you can customize them as much as possible with what some of those initiatives were that you drove within those specific companies, that's going to be really valuable as well. And finally, I'm just going to say, just some of the dates are missing with some of the experiences, right? And so when you're not very specific about how long you were at a company, when you started, when your time ended, that tells me that maybe there's something that's not being said. So while that may not be true, we definitely like to see how long were you with a company, so that we don't feel like there's something that's being hidden there. We might see that as a red flag. So I'd always encourage at least adding from what year to what year, and then even more preferably month and year and month and year.
Yeah, that's super great, super valuable tips. Thank you for that. And Daniel, how about you?
I mean, what comes to mind for me is, just to say this out loud, don't be afraid to brag. Like, your resume is your chance to talk about the great stuff that you did. I sometimes find that I would, you know, not always share like awards or, again, you have to tamper it. But I would just say, if you help us understand what success looked like in your role. And so, like Brian was saying, it may be like, I was a top performer out of 20 people, or I exceeded my goal by X, you know. And if I can understand your goal, or I can understand how you compared to other people, that helps me understand the work that you were doing and how you stood out. So I would just say, you know, don't shy away from really bragging on yourself, but help someone who doesn't know your job, help them understand it quickly. And so I think giving some sort of comparison point a lot of times does that.
Great. Brian, did you want to add anything?
No, it was great, Melissa, Daniel. That's exactly what I was going to share. I find that oftentimes dates don't align with maybe what I see in their online profiles on, let's say, a LinkedIn. And so they've made a mistake somewhere, or I'm wondering, gosh, are they actually hiding something because I actually found a mistake, right? And so I find that dates and certainly misspellings are a big part of that. I also find sometimes that candidates oftentimes prioritize education more than they do experience. And so while it might be fine to put your university experience at the top when you're just graduating, because you don't have a lot of experience, or maybe just have a few internships, once you're 5 years in, you've got to bring that, education probably down a little bit. What's more important to us is what you've done and the results that you've had in your role versus the education that you had. In fact, I had a resume this week, a person who's been in the industry 10 years, but yet the first thing on his resume is where he graduated from, even though he graduated in 2010. And so you sometimes see folks who just don't spend a lot of time on their resumes, and they really need to. In fact, I'm a big believer in tailoring your resume to specific jobs. And so if you have a particular job that you're searching, you want to be employed by that company and want to be in that role, I wouldn't cut and paste the position description, but I would tailor it so that it's more likely that you'll get a call.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like copying and pasting should be out. That is a big mistake. We heard it from Brian and Melissa. So moving on, can either of you tell us about a time when a candidate stood out on their application or resume and why? Does a specific candidate come to mind?
Yeah, I just had one yesterday. We're doing a search for a office manufacturer. All right, and so they produce product that goes into offices, and so they're looking for a salesperson in Dallas, and so this person will be kind of a regional sales manager. And what was really great about the resume is this person not only shared his quota. And so that's a number that's quantitative, how many years he hit his quota, the types of accounts that he sold into. So I get an understanding of what type of accounts that person is sold into, the products that he sold, the sales cycle. So it usually takes anywhere between 2 months to 4 months to complete a project. That's in $500,000 project and above. How he prospects, the types of so there was kind of an understanding of just kind of, this is what I do to actually find these accounts, whether it was a service or a product that he sold into that account, and then awards that he's won. And so all that on one resume just allowed me to understand, okay, this is an A player. Right? This is somebody who has exceeded expectation in the entirety of his career, and I need to talk to that person. So yeah, that one comes to mind because I just saw it yesterday.
Wow, that's amazing. How about you, Melissa?
I think we're probably going to continue to repeat this, but I think that when you can customize your resume or application to the company specifically that you're applying to, that has a big impact. And so, for example, I've seen some resumes where they try to use some taco puns, and I appreciate those. I don't think they're cheesy at all. But there could definitely be a boundary, but we have a lot of fun with that. And people read the tone, right? So Torchy's, we have fun, we're edgy, and we keep things lighthearted. So it's totally acceptable for our job descriptions. You can see that on there too. We will, our slogan is damn good, right? So we're looking for a damn good accountant, right? And so when you're applying, if you customize to that, that's acceptable, right? Because you're taking our tone and our voice and our language. And so when people take the time to kind of take on our voice too, and show that they're passionate about the culture that we represent too, that has really stood out to us. I will say that cover letters, and this is my opinion, I don't know if Daniel and Brian will agree with me, but cover letters to me seem a little bit outdated at this point, unless a company is going to require it on the application. And so if you can really take some time to put some elements of what you might include in a cover letter into your resume. So maybe, for example, at the top, speak to why, let's say, Torchy specifically stood out to you, whether you have a favorite restaurant that you get to visit or you had a good experience, or just what you observed on your online research, right? Just a quick little snippet, obviously not make it too lengthy. I think that speaks volumes. And when I've seen that, definitely is appealing. And also to speak to what Brian said, any accomplishments, especially if they're related to the roles that you might be seeking, if you can list those, any awards or certifications that you've achieved, that's always great. And sometimes that speaks more than, an education at this point. And Also, any volunteer philanthropy efforts that, again, might tailor to some of the roles that you've worked in. I think that helps speak to, what matters to you and why that might help you achieve success in the role that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And touching on the cover letter, I don't know, Daniel or Brian, but when there is a cover letter, what makes a cover letter stand out, and what are you looking for in that cover letter?
I kind of agree with Melissa that it's kind of outdated by now, but some of my clients do require it. And so we have these candidates actually do. It has to be short and sweet. It can't be long. We don't have a whole lot of time to read it. In many ways, what the client is looking for is this person aligned with our values, and can you speak to that a little bit? And that's what we see mostly. A resume is for whether you're good at that and why you should be considered. That's the resume. I don't think you repeat what's on your resume on the cover letter. I think the cover letter should be more about, do I align with the mission and values of that company?
Great. Daniel, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that I agree. I've seen some folks kind of evolve the cover letter into a couple sentences at the top of their resume, where they will sum up, honestly, you'll condense like a 2-3 paragraph cover letter into why me for this role. That's kind of how I see the cover letters evolving a bit. Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, so do you all have one tip that a candidate can prepare for a job interview? Like, say, video interview, in-person interview. What is your one tip on how they can best prepare for that?
Yeah, I can dive in. I would say I'm going to have some commas. So this is one tip with a couple commas in it, okay. Which may be a couple tips. But I would say, like, be a learner. And so I would say, one, study the company. Like, I would always read up on the company in the news. If I could understand the company priorities, like Mel talked about, understand the company culture. Like, that is one way that you can really set yourself apart, knowing information about the company. So I do a lot of that research myself, but then also knowing the job, the role. And so having ideas of how would you operate in this role, so that as theoretical questions come or specific role related questions come, you're not on your back foot. You already have thought through, what could success in that role look like. And so as you're, studying and learning, I would also just say, lastly, is have some intentional questions prepared. So when you're having that conversation, I really want candidates to ask me thoughtful questions, because I know that they're assessing us as well. And so I would encourage folks to think about those in advance.
That's a great tip. How about you, Melissa?
Yeah, I just want to speak to kind of the new virtual world too. I would say prepare for an interview by also evaluating your setting. That might be on video too. That's something that might be new to a lot of us, right? And so being thoughtful about what's behind you, what's in your house. So, for example, for this call today, I placed my dog somewhere else. And that's important, right? Because, those can cause interruptions during an interview. So in the virtual setting, making sure, if you're going to have an office in your bedroom, that your bed is made, if that's what's behind you, right? And so it is inviting people into your home, which is a really unique scenario these days. So if that's the case, just be a little bit more intentional about what does your surrounding look like, and still dressing and looking as if you're going to an in-person interview, I would say is a key way to prepare for that immediate interview too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Brian?
Yeah, I think most importantly, I think a person, like Daniel said, has to do some research on the company. I think we all know that not every company puts all of their positions out there on job postings, the ones that they can't find. But normally what companies are doing is they're using their network. Do you know somebody? Do you know somebody? So there's actually more jobs out there that are on the job postings. And so I would say to you, if there's a company out there that you want to work for, but there's no job postings online that you can find, I would still put them on the list and do research for that company and find a way to have a contact within that company. So look at your circle of influence, see if you have anybody who's within who works for that company or knows somebody who works for that company. I would even go so far as to tell you to reach out to people who used to work for that company. That's easy to do on LinkedIn. If there's a company that you're really interested in working for, and you want to know what the challenges are within that company, because what that company is looking for you to do is, I need somebody to solve this problem for me. That's what companies are doing in any position. They're trying to, hey, I need somebody to solve, and this is why we have this position open. So trying to find out what are the challenges within that company, one way to do that might be for you to actually reach out to people who used to work at that company to find out, hey, what's going on in the company? Tell me a little bit about the challenges. And then that way, when you're in an interview setting, you can actually talk to them as if you know what's going on within their company. So it takes a lot of initiative to do that. But I can tell you it stands out. And another thing that Daniel said is asking really great questions at the end of your interview. Your ability to ask questions at the end of the interview tells me whether you really want this job or not. It is a differentiator, a huge differentiator for me, if a person has put some thought into asking very interesting questions and questions that allow the interviewer to understand, wow, this person really wants to work here.
Wow, those are super, super valuable tips. I'm super excited. Besides making your bed, asking questions, and what is something that you would like to tell every job seeker on this webinar today from a recruiter's perspective that you haven't already said?
I'll say that, the details matter. So any details, for example, your email address, if you can make it as close to, a general email address as possible that includes your name, I would highly recommend that versus, dog lover 101. Nothing against dog lovers, but if you can make your email address, more professional, I think that makes a difference. And then that's a small detail, right? If you can be intentional about how you name your resume document too, because that helps recruiters. So actually saying Melissa Wade resume 2021, right? That helps us really be able to share the resumes easily, know exactly which resume we're looking at when we save them. So details like that definitely matter. This might sound a little bit nitpicky, but even submitting your resume in a PDF document versus a Word document also makes it easier for the recruiter to be able to view the resume more quickly. And it makes it easy for us to share. And as a candidate, you reduce the risk of anything being changed or edited. Also, I'll say that thank you emails are not outdated. It can go a really long way. So, after you have an interview, even each step of the interview process, as you meet with different people, sending a personalized email, you can even reach out to the recruiter and say, hey, I really enjoyed my conversation with this person. Can I have their email address so I can shoot them a note? And so don't be shy to ask that for the recruiter. We're here to help you and support you along the way. And so that really goes a long way and shows that you are really being thoughtful about the process. And, just to reiterate what Daniel and Brian said is just really asking thoughtful questions at the end of an interview that shows that you research the company, and also personal questions to your recruiter, to your interviewer about, what do they enjoy about the company, or what is the company culture like? Just anything that's really showing that not only do you care about their personal experience with the company that they've been with, but also that you've really taken the time to learn about the company.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So we're going to do something super fun. We're going to do a really, really quick speed round. It says 30 seconds, but some of them are yes or no questions. And so it's going to go super fast. How long do you take to look at a resume? We'll start with you, Daniel.
30 seconds.
Melissa?
10 seconds.
And Brian?
10 to 15 seconds.
Perfect. Should a resume be more than one page? Yes or no?
No.
I will say not unless the experience truly calls for it.
All right.
Starting out, 1 page is fine. As you get older, I don't mind 2 pages.
Great. Should resume have color?
Sure.
Sure.
Yes, but subtle.
Great.
Yeah, no real preference, not multicolor, and it can't be overwhelming.
All right. Does a candidate with a portfolio stand out?
Yes, definitely for some of our design roles. Ability to see what a candidate does, like a work sample, pops. Yeah.
Right.
For relevant positions, yes, like Daniel said, especially if it's like a graphic designer type role or a specific role in marketing, definitely include a portfolio, maybe not relevant to some of the other roles.
Right.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, when we do design roles for our designers and design companies, we want to see a portfolio. We want to see the creativity. We want to see proof of your competency. And so absolutely, any sort of online portfolio would be very beneficial.
Great. And we are running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to ask Daniel, what is the weirdest thing you've seen on a resume?
Well, the weirdest and my favorite was a picture of the candidate with a couple birds kind of sitting on their shoulders. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so that was super awesome. Thank you all so much for answering those questions. We're going to move to our Q&A session. And so we have quite a few questions that came from our attendees today. So how do women approach a childcare gap and take time off to raise a family?
I think I spoke to this earlier, but if you can just explain your gaps, you obviously don't necessarily owe an employer an explanation that you have a child, but if there's any way that you can somehow explain your gap in a professional way, that's totally acceptable. And I think that, if a company truly values family and that life and work balance, as a lot of candidates are looking for now, then they're going to move you forward, right? And I would say if a company is not choosing to move you forward because of that, then it probably isn't the best match for you anyways.
Great. Should resumes be accompanied with a portfolio virtually or paper? Thank you.
Virtually, absolutely. Yeah, unless it's some sort of specific ask by the company, everything is done digitally now.
Great. Okay, and what advice do you have for career changes? I have been a professor for 20 years teaching management information systems and now looking for a position in the industry. I find myself lacking years of experience for senior positions while probably looking overqualified for entry-level ones.
Yeah, I would say to own that in the same way that we were communicating, like communicate the gap. Don't shy away from the gap. In the same way, talk about why you want to have a career change. I did the same thing when I moved into the tech industry. I I articulated that both on my resume, because I had a long experience in the nonprofit industry and in education, and it seemed out of left field to move into the tech industry. And so being able to articulate the why you want to make that move, and then proactively thinking through, I guarantee that some of your work as a professor definitely translates, but
Sorry, Daniel, I think you cut off for like the last 10 seconds.
Oh no.
I can hear you now.
Okay. You can hear me. I would just say continue to articulate. Am I good?
Yes.
Okay. Articulate the why. Articulate the why you want to make that move. And when I made a shift in my career, it was, I would say, non-traditional to move into the tech industry, but to really explain the why and to pull out some of the experience that you have as a professor and how it correlates to this industry experience. Because if you can be intentional about pulling that out and connecting those dots, the recruiter will see it as well.
Great. All right. Where in a resume should we specify different things like lifelong learning, as well as what are thoughts of self-employed but looking to work for an organization?
Yeah, I think if you want to display that you are a lifelong learner, the question then becomes, well, how do you show that, right? And so you want to share with them some of the ways in which you have learned things over the years, maybe how you've applied what you've learned. And so I would say that from a resume perspective, that goes at the bottom in regard to how you've done that. I mentioned podcast earlier. That just gives the recruiter or the hiring manager an understanding of these are the things that he's learning, or this is the type of podcast, or these are the books that this person has read. Don't go overboard with a long list, but you want to make sure that the person understands that you are a lifelong learner. It might be done through just experience as well. It might not just be from outside your industry. It might be how you've done continuing education in your field. And so in many ways, what that looks like is taking classes and getting certifications as well.
Great. And what can a fresh graduate do to stand out in their resume since they don't have any experience, which includes answering interview questions about past experiences?
I will say that, there can be a lot of experience that comes from being in school. And, even sometimes I look back to my school days and think about, wow, I did all of that in one day. And so, being able to pull from any internship experiences that you had or extracurricular activities that you were involved with in school, or any specific classes that you took that might be applicable to the career you're looking for. When you don't necessarily have all of the working career experience in a full-time role, that's when you really can get creative in terms of pulling from some of those extracurricular activities that you've participated in. And that's when it's even more important to show more thoughtfulness in why you're specifically looking for a role with a company. And Brian spoke to this earlier too, but the more you can kind of tap into your contacts. So when you look on LinkedIn and you look at a specific company and you see which connections work at that specific location, reach out to them. A lot of times people are so happy to help a new grad really launch their careers. So the more connections you can make internally in those companies, the better.
Great. And last Q&A question, how far back should you put your job experience on your resume?
I think for most people, putting the entirety up through your education is the norm. As you get older, as you get into your 50s, you'll start to take off those entry-level positions that you had after college. You want to focus on the positions that are going to help you in your next role. And so if it's maybe something that had nothing to do with where you're going in your career now, then you can kind of take those off. So yeah, I would there is such a thing as age discrimination in the world today, and so how do you play that game without showing that you're ancient? There's ways to do that, and so trimming off some of your older roles would be beneficial probably at that point.
I think you can also, just to build on that, Brian, just consolidate the some of the roles that were longer ago, so that you do have a bit of the emphasis on the more recent roles and how those roles tie to the role that you're going after. Yeah. Agreed.
Great tip. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Daniel and Melissa and Brian, for all of your super great knowledge and expertise. And thank you, attendees, for your curiosity and for joining us today, and for everyone taking time out of their day to be here. We really hope that you leave this webinar with new insight, super great tips, and a lot more confidence to make your next career move. And we we'll be sending out all of our resources in a follow-up email, including the recording of this webinar. And make sure that you follow Bulb on social media. We do have Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook,